city go against me. Every time I'm in the street, I hear yak, yak, yak.
Hello people of the MFL emergency video time. If you read through the email, you knew that something like this was coming. I've just gone through all the playoff odds, so I think it's time to talk about it. I think it's going to be just a video, minimal cuts and all that. You know, it's going to be easier for me to talk through it instead of writing another big thing out. Because I do have a big thing written out, but it's in my own like shorthand, so no one's going to be able to really read that the right way, and I'm not going to flesh it out writing it down. Okay. Yeah, we have a week left to go, and there's still 10 teams in playoff contention. Only 2 have actually solidified their spot. There's probably 5 that are 99% going to be in. I'd be shocked if any of those top 5 weren't in. And then there's a couple that like I really don't think are going to make it. But we're going to give every team their fair shot, because if you've gotten to week 14, you have a chance. I'll give it to you. I'll give you the time of day. Yeah, well, let's go through it all. And this is all like TBD, because as we know, if you've read the email, there's a lot of stat corrections still to be seen, which affects the football team, the average Joes, and potentially the brain damage. I think Dylan's fine. I think he's going to be 12-14. It'd be a crazy stat correction for him to lose and either of his 2 wins. But we've seen some crazy stuff in this league before. So we are currently assuming that the ESPN standings are going to stay accurate. But I do have alternate scenarios built in case something changes. Because right now, Not Your Average Joe's has earned the bonus win for Week 13 in the number 6 slot by 1/10 of a point over Andrew's Washington football team. That makes the Average Joe's 18-8 and the football team 12-14. If it switches around and Andrew gets a positive stat correction, he goes into the 6th slot, it wouldn't mean much for Hunter. He'd be 17-9, still like he's already clinched his playoff spot. It's just really for seeding. If Hunter keeps that 18th win, he's at least locked into the 3, but it doesn't change much for him. Andrew, it does change a lot for, because he'd be 13-13, and then in basically a win and you're in scenario against Graham. But we'll see on that. And, you know, Graham's tiebreaker scenarios right now at 13-13 would be the same for the football team, just about like points scored, tiebreakers and all that. That's the only difference. So we'll get to that down the line. I like to think these go quick, but I know it's going to be like 25 minutes. I'm going to put the chapters on, and I think that's going to be very important. I don't expect anybody to like really go through this whole thing. If you're just looking for your team, you click on, you know, your team's name, and I'll give you your playoff scenarios. This is not going to be a very well-edited thing. I'm just going to try and talk and get it out so everyone has the information. Okay, without further ado, let's go look at the standings as they are right now. With a Fine Pilsner in the 1 seed at 19-7. They look very likely to be the 1, not clinched yet. If Hunter gets the stat correction, though, Pilsner, as long as they set their lineup, will be the 1 seed. But right now, as it stands, there's still something to play for Week 14 for Pilsner. The Respectors are the outstate division leaders, and they need a 2-0 week, basically, to wrap up a first-round bye in the 2 seed. The Average Joes are the 3. Right now, with that 18th win, they are locked into the 3. But again, if that stat correction comes in and the Average Joes go to 17-9, they could fall to the 4. Then the meat of what we're going to talk about today concerns 4 teams: the Disciples, Water Family, the Hamms, the Bradshaws, and I guess 5, because the Respectors and Water Family are both in this wild card conversation here. The Disciples at 15-11 are basically in. The Water Family at 14-12, playing the MCs Week 14, are basically in. We'll see on that, though. The Hamms at 14-12 are definitely not in yet. The Bradshaws are the first team out at 13-13, and then we have 3 teams at 12-14, the Millers, the football team, and the Brain Damage. If the football team gets the stat correction, they'll go to 13-13, like I've said a million times already. So the bar to get in will be at least 14-14. If you're under 500, don't show up. You're done. You're not going to make it. Both seasons 1 and 2 have had one team make the playoffs at 500. The bar could go up to 15-13, but I would expect, just the way that it goes, the 6th seed is likely going to be 14-14. That's what I would think. There are scenarios where the 6th seed will be 15-13. We'll see. Okay, a 5-minute intro. Now, I guess you can go look at your teams or whatever, but we're going to start from 1 and work our way all the way down to 10. We'll start with a Fine Pilsner. These first couple will be quick, and then we'll get into the meat here in a second. Beery and BZ, a Fine Pilsner. At 19-7, the 1 seed, you're playing the Hermantown Hamms next week to wrap up the regular season. Playoff berth is locked up, and the Metro Division and the 1 seed look pretty likely, but it's not a sure thing just yet. So if you go 2-0, pretty easy. 21-7, best record in the league, you win Metro. Easy. If you go 1-1, you'd be 20-8. So any loss from the average Joes would give you the 1 seed in the Metro Division title and all of that. If Hunter stays at 18-8, he could go, well, I guess no, I'm sorry, I'm not even reading what I wrote. If Hunter keeps this 18-8 record instead of going 17-9, and Pilsner goes 1-1, the average Joes go 2-0. Both teams will be tied at 20-8. But if you go to the points scored tiebreaker, Pilsner, you're up on Hunter by over 300 points. Hunter will not be making that up in 1 week. So even with 1-1, even in this current scenario that we're in, Pilsner's going to win the Metro Division with a single win. And we'll also get the 1 seed. If you win the division in Metro, you're going to get the 1, just based off of how these records have gone. So if you go 0-2, then you're 19-9. Any loss from the Joes will give you the 1 seed. But basically, the doomsday scenario is if Hunter goes 2-0, Pilsner goes 0-2, and there are no stat corrections that come through. That would put Hunter at 20-8, Pilsner at 19-9, and would give Hunter the division and put Pilsner in the 3. That is basically it. Just finish in the top 6 or beat Kevin, and you have the 1 seed wrapped up, and week 15 is, you don't have to set your lineups for anything. It's a no-show for Pilsner, and that'd be okay. So that's number 1. We're going to go to actually Hunter, because it's kind of the reverse here. And then we'll get into like the Respectors and Famileh, because that's where the meat of this situation is. Second best record in the league, looking at the 3 seed, likely for not your average Joes at 18-8, playing the Marcy Holmes Millers to finish the season, week number 14. So if you keep this 18th win, there are no stat corrections. We're just assuming that, of course, 2-0 means you're going 20-8, and you get the 1 seed if Pilsner goes 0-2. With any Pilsner win, you'd clinch the 3 seed. If you go 1-1, you're 19-9. You're not going to win any points scored tiebreaker with Pilsner. That's Pilsner's worst possible record at 19-9. If you go 0-2, you're 18-10 and locked into the 3 seed. If we lose the tiebreaker, let's think about that. I guess not the tiebreaker. What am I talking about? If you lose the 18th win, if you go into the bottom 6 off the stat correction, that would put you at 17-9 right now. So then if you go 2-0, you'd be 19-9, locked into the 3 seed. If you go 1-1, you'd be 18-10, still locked into the 3 seed. If you go 0-2, you'd be 17-11, which means the Disciples would have to go 2-0 to be 17-11. And right now, the Disciples own that tiebreaker. It doesn't look like they'll give it up. So the only way to fall out of the 3 seed for Hunter is this stat correction coming in, pushing you to 0-2 this week, then going 0-2 next week, then having Shu go 2-0, and then you'd be into the 4. That's as low as the average Joes can go. Don't see that happening, but that is, I guess, the average Joe's doomsday scenario. It looks like likely, there's no home field advantage in the MFL, but you'd basically be hosting a wild card weekend playoff game, week number 15. That's what I would think is going to happen. Okay, those are the easy ones. We're going to the Rochester Road Respectors next. with the incredible Bradshaws lucky win last week against Elliott, that gives Lucas his own destiny. He controls his own destiny to win the outstate division and take the 2 seed. He's playing Rob in the Gentleman's Classic, and Rob is one of only 2 teams eliminated from playoff contention. There's actually nothing to play for Nice Brock. So I would imagine Lucas is going to get at least 1 win, unless Rob wants the bragging rights and, has a moral compass on him. We'll see. If I was in Rob's position, I would try and go 0-2 and just lock up the number 2 overall pick. That's what I'd do. But I'm not Rob, so we'll see what happens. Either way, I would expect Lucas to get at least 1 win in the head-to-head. The only thing we're looking at really is whether or not he goes 2-0 or 1-1. We'll go through everything, though, because we don't know what Rob is actually going to do. If Lucas goes 2-0, which is a very likely scenario, he controls his own destiny. So winning both games would make him 17-11. Elliott can't do anything about it. Lucas would win the outstate division and be the 2 seed. That is how that would go. If Lucas goes 1-1, he'd be 16-12. And we're going to assume throughout the rest of this that Elliott is going to at least finish 1-1 because he's playing the MCs. Who, I've locked up the number 1 overall pick. They could try, but they just have not. Those 2 teams haven't been in the same league basically all season. I'm assuming that Elliott's at least getting 1 win. We're not going to go so far as to say that Lucas is getting at least 1 win. I would think that would likely happen, but just bear with me here for a second. So we're assuming Water Family's bar is 15-13. That's their low point. If Lucas goes 1-1, they'll be 16-12. So going 1-1, Lucas can still win the division. So if he finishes 16-12, they'll be the 2 seed. If Elliott also finishes in the bottom 6, and he would go 1-1 at that point, Lucas be 16-12, Elliott be 15-13. So Lucas would win the division once again at 16-12. If Elliott finishes in the top 6 and goes 2-0, and Lucas finishes 1-1, they'll be tied at 16-12, and Elliott's definitely winning that tiebreaker off points scored. So Lucas would be in the 4-5 matchup. I didn't check the seedings for that because you're just going to be the 4 or the 5. Home field advantage doesn't really matter in that scenario. Then you'd be the 6th seed. There's a way to be the 6th seed if you are 1-1. That is if a lot of things got to happen here to make Lucas the 6th seed if he goes 1-1. Elliott's got to go 2-0. Disciples need 1 win in there somewhere to make sure they're 16-12. The Hams would have to go 2-0 and outscore the Respectors by 56 points to take over the points scored tiebreaker. That would make, that'd make Elliott the 2. That would mean Hunter's the 3. Shu is the 4, and Kevin taking the tiebreaker and being 16-12 would make the Hams 5 and the Respectors 6. That's how that would go. So the bar could be as high as 16-12 to get into the playoffs this year. I don't see that happening, but it's possible. So that's all the 1-1 scenarios for the Respectors. Now we're going to get into the stuff that I don't feel is as likely. If the Respectors go 0-2, they'll be 15-13. They will likely not be able to leapfrog the Disciples in any way off a point scored tiebreaker. They're down 88 points to the Disciples, so I would assume if the Respectors go 0-2, the Disciples will definitely be above them. So the highest watermark Lucas could have at 15-13 is the 5 seed. So he gets the 5 seed while going 0-2. If Kevin goes 0-2, pause. There's so much shit to talk about. I'm sorry. He's the 5 seed if Kevin goes 1-1 and does not overtake Lucas in the tiebreaker. So all Lucas has to do is make sure that Kevin does not outscore him by 56 or more points, and the Respectors will be above the Hams in the final standings as long as Kevin works a loss in there somewhere. So that's part 1 of being the 5 seed. Then part 2, the football team will have to take down the Bradshaws just to make sure that Boomtown does not go 2-0. Because right now Graham is actually 5th in points scored. He had a really, really great week and vaulted up those standings. So that's the 5 seed. I hope that made sense. I kind of feel like I'm rambling, but this is, an 8-page thing. Oh, it's a 5-pager. It's a 5-pager with all these scenarios. Let's get back to it. If Lucas goes 0-2, he would be the 6th seed if either the Hamms or the Bradshaws go 2-0, but not both of them. You can only have one of them go 2-0, so only one of them is above you in the standings. The team that would go 2-0 there would be the 5 seed, then Lucas would be the 6, and the team that didn't go 2-0 would be the 7. Lucas, if he goes 0-2, this is how the doomsday scenario. Lucas misses the playoffs if he goes 0-2 versus Brock. The Bradshaws go 2-0 versus the football team. Hamms go 2-0 versus Pilsner, or get this, they outscore Lucas by 50-something and still go 1-1. So in this case, if it's the doomsday, Pilsner's 1, Famileh is 2, Joe's are 3, Disciples are 4, the Hamms are 5 at 16-12, the Bradshaws get to 15-13 and win the points scored tiebreaker, and the Respectors are out at 15-13 as the 7 seed. So again, going 0-2 for Lucas, I don't see that happening, and it got even confusing for me in these backwater potentials. But just win one game. Like, just go 1-1 against the team that does not have anything to play for from a playoff perspective, and you're in. That's it. That's it for Lucas. Win one and you're in. Same thing for Shu, just a little bit different. Time for the St. Thomas Disciples. He's been on the edge this whole time, but the St. Thomas Disciples are not at 100% yet. It's like 99.99999. At 15-11, taking on the brain damage this week. If Shu goes 2-0, he'll be 17-11. Without any stat corrections, if things stay how they are right now, Shu has no shot at the 3 seed. He'd be locked into the 4 if he goes 2-0. If Hunter goes down to 17-9 and then goes 0-2, the Disciples could go 2-0 and take that 3 seed. But it needs the stat correction. You need the stat correction, a 2-0 week, and a Hunter 0-2 week to get into the 3. But very, very likely the Disciples will be in the 4-5 matchup somehow. So yeah, go 2-0 and it's no problems. Go 1-1 and wow, you're locked into the 4-5. So a 1-1 week puts the Disciples into the 4-5. You're the 4 seed if the Respectors lose in some way and the Famileh leapfrog the Respectors and win outstate. And then also the Hamms got to work in a loss there somewhere. And the Disciples have a 144 point advantage in points scored, so the Hamms will not be taking over that tiebreaker in 1 week, I don't think. Unless it's like 260 versus 120, and I don't, like, that's not happening. So 1-1, you're locked into the 4 or the 5, just in that matchup, likely getting the loser of the outstate division race. That's probably what's going to happen. If you go 0-2, which is a possibility against a brain damaged team that really, really needs 2 wins if they want to make it, this is what would happen. You could still have the 4 seed if you go 0-2. That would have to be if Water Family gets 1 win combined with the Respectors 0-2 week. That would put Elliott in the 2 and Lucas then below the Disciples. So that has to happen. And the Hamms would also have to go 0-2. So she would be at 15-13, but so would the Respectors, and so would the Hamms. And I mean, so would the Bradshaws too, even if they went 2-0. But yeah, she would be at the top of that 15-13 tiebreaker. So it'd be Shu at 15, Lucas, then the 5 seed, and Kevin, the 6. That's how that would go to keep the 4 seed. If you go 0-2, you're in the 5 seed if both the Respectors and Water Family get at least 1 win. Hermantown's also got to finish with 1 loss. The Bradshaws also have to lose a game or not make up the 60 points they need to gain on the Disciples. They still could go 2-0, and as long as Shu keeps it within 60, you're good. So yeah, I hope that makes sense. Like, I write these down and it like checks out, and then I say it back. I'm like, oh shit, does this make any sense? I'll just kind of put up, like, I should move this way and put like the whole thing up there so you can just read it the whole time. They're the 6th seed if both the Respectors and the Famileh get at least 1 win and you go 0-2. That would put both of them at Oh, Jesus Christ. This is so tough to talk about, dude. Both the Respectors and Water Family get at least one win, which would put the Respectors at 16 and 12 above Shoe, and would put Water Family at least 15 and 13 above Shoe in the tiebreaker. That's why I wrote that. Okay, we're back. So they do that. Then you also need the Hams to go 2-0, so they're above you at 16 and 12. Or the Bradshaws go 2-0 and make up that big point scored tiebreaker. You can't have both. You have to have just one in order to be the 6th seed. Because I believe, if both of those things do happen, you'd miss the playoffs. This is the St. Thomas new doomsday scenario that was inaccurate in the email. This is the new one. Both the Respectors and Water Family need at least one win. Hermantown's got to go 2-0 against Pilsner. The Bradshaws have to go 2-0 against the football team. And Graham has to make up a 60-point score disadvantage right now in order to leapfrog the Disciples. In that case, if that were to happen, Pilsner's at 1. The winner of Outstate, it doesn't matter who it would be, but they would be in the 2. The Joes would be in the 3. So the 4-5 matchup would be between the Hams and the loser of Outstate, both of them at 16 and 12. The 6th seed then would come down to a tiebreaker between the Bradshaws and the Disciples, and Graham would have to win that on points scored. So in that scenario, Graham makes up a 60-point disadvantage and takes over the 6th seed over the Disciples. That is not impossible. That's actually, it's not going to happen necessarily, but it's not like so far-fetched that it couldn't happen. But it takes a lot. You need the family to get at least one win. That is going to happen. You would think the Respectors get at least one win. Cool. The Hams going 2-0 against Pilsner? I don't know about that. It's possible, but I don't think so. Bradshaw's 2-0. They're hot. So all of these things could, they seem pretty likely, except the 60-point thing. I don't think that's going to happen. You're getting Justin Jefferson back. A-Chain's been great. The Disciples look like a solid squad at this point. I don't think the Bradshaws are getting a 60-point advantage anytime soon. That's the way. That's the way with the Disciples. Again, so tough to talk about this shit, man. Water Family coming up next. Elliot Newman. An incredibly unlucky loss last week for Elliot. He's had some really great performances and some really, really tough 1-1 weeks. But the one thing that he hasn't had yet is the second time playing the Mason City MCs. So you would think Elliot's going to get at least one win. The only way he misses the playoffs is if he goes 0-2 against a team that is 1-25. I don't think that's going to happen. So let's assume that Elliot is in the playoffs. He's got a shot to win the division. We'll go through it. So he's 14-12, taking on the bottom feeder in Mason City. If he goes 2-0, as seems very, very likely to happen, any Respectors loss will give Elliot the Outstate division title. If Lucas goes 1-1, just finishes bottom 6, then bang, Elliot will be the 2 seed with a top 6 finish this week, assuming that he does what everyone else has done besides Pilsner this year and beat the MCs. He would be the 4 seed with a Respectors 2-0 week and any Disciples loss. But if both teams go 2-0, so if everyone in this scenario, family, Respectors, Disciples, if they all go 2-0, that means the Respectors are the 2, the Disciples are the 4, and Water Family is the 5. That's how that goes. So now let's say Water Family finishes bottom 6 this week. Doesn't have a great week with Tank Dell out, and they finish 15-13. You can still win the division if the Respectors go 0-2. That's an unlikely scenario with both these teams playing the teams eliminated from the playoffs. But possible still. Brock's shown a lot more life than the MCs have this year. The 4 seed is pretty likely with any Respectors win. That means the Respectors would be in the 2. A Disciples 0-2 week, and then any Hams loss. That would put a lot of teams at 15-13, and right now Elliot is second in points scored, so he would finish at the top of the tiebreaker at the 4. He'd be the 5 seed with any Respectors win, again, not winning the division. And then any win from the Disciples or the Hams, not both. Because the 6 seed would be Elliott's if you get at least one win from the Respectors, the Disciples, and the Hams. Or, I think, no, the Hams have to be 2-0. Yeah, the Hams would have to go 2-0 because Elliott's not giving up that tiebreaker anytime soon. So you need at least one win from the Respectors, at least one win from the Disciples, and then a 2-0 week from the Hams to have them at 16-12 and Elliott down at 15-13. That's how the 6 seed would go. That'd be, Pilsner 1, Respectors 2, Joe's 3, Disciples 4 at 16-12, Hams 5 at 16-12, Elliott 6 at 15-13. And then, if he goes 0-2, he's down to 14-14. Incredible chaos scenario. I didn't go through that because I really don't think it's going to happen. Could be as high as the 5 seed with some other tiebreakers. He would be eliminated from the playoffs if he goes 0-2. The Hams catch any win possible, and a 2-0 week from either the Bradshaws or the Millers. And then you'd have to, if the Bradshaws were to go 2-0, they'd have to make up the points scored differential. And the Millers would have to as well, but if Water Family goes 0-2 and the Millers go 2-0, we're taking back that point scored tiebreaker because it's within 11 points. If that were to happen, the Millers would likely leapfrog, but it's not going to happen because they're playing the MCs. Just here to say everything that's possible. That's Water Family. I mean, you're very, very likely in. Not a 50-50 shot to win the division. I'd say Lucas probably has better odds. But you're definitely in, it looks like, and will be favored in whatever playoff matchup you get, most likely, because this team is going balls to the walls right now. That is Water Family. Let's go to the Hermantown Hams, who are right on the edge. 5-8 in the top 6 this year, 9-4 head-to-head. And it's not the first time something like this has happened. Kevin Andrews is +4 on the year. The second time in 3 seasons he's been +4. And that puts him at the 6th seed right now. He's 14-12, 10th in points scored, going up against a Fine Pilsner. And if he drops any game here, there's going to be a lot of teams that will have a shot to take the 6th seed from him. He's been sitting in the 6 for a few weeks now. But the way it's shaken out, he really needs to go 2-0. If he goes 15-13, there's still a good shot, but there's going to be teams right on his ass. So, at 14-12, playing the top-seeded Fine Pilsner, a 2-0 week would be insane, but it would get him to 16-12. The Hams would be as high as the 4 seed if that happens. So, 4 seed with the Disciples going 0-2. That would make them 15-13. Hams would leapfrog to 16-12. You need the outstate race loser to be at 15-13, which could be either the Respectors or Water Family. If the loser of this race ends up being the Respectors at 15-13, they'll need to go 0-2 against Brock. If it's Water Family, they would need to go at least 1-1. But for the family to lose that, if they go 1-1, the Respectors would have to go 2-0. So whichever team loses the division race, they have to be at 15 wins. If they're going to be at 16 wins, they're going to hold the tiebreaker over the Hams. Basically, every team in the playoffs would hold the tiebreaker over the Hams. That's why if they lose once, you got some teams right on your heels. So let's say, I think this is the most likely scenario. Let's say the Hams go 1-1. They finish in the top 6. They have a good lineup this week, but they're playing Pilsner, who is going to try to win. Why not? So they'd go 15-13 in that scenario. They cannot catch the Disciples in any way, even if they go 0-2, because the Disciples are so far ahead of them in points scored. So, best case scenario with a 1-1 week is the 5 seed. You need both. Oh God, that's impossible. It's not going to happen then. The 5 seed, you need Water Family and the Respectors to both go 0-2, which would put the Respectors into the 2 seed at 15-13 and Water Family below you at 14-14. But that means that the number 1 and number 2 overall pick teams right now would have to go a combined 4-0. Don't see that happening. You'd also need the Bradshaws to catch a loss in some way. So let's say that's not happening. If you go 1-1, you won't be the 5 seed. You could be the 6 seed with any win from Water Family, as long as the Respectors go 0-2. That would put Water Family into the 2 seed and put the Respectors maybe below you. The Bradshaws would need to go 1-1 or 0-2. So that would make, that would make Pilsner 1, the Family 2, Joe's 3, Disciples 4, Respectors 5, and then, with a Bradshaw's loss, that keeps him at 14-14, and the Hams would be the 6 at 15-13. You could miss the playoffs with a 1-1 week here. So you go 1-1, Family wins, and the Bradshaws go 2-0. Very likely possibility here. Then that scenario would be Pilsner 1, 2, the winner of the outstate race, regardless of who it is. The Joes would be 3, the Disciples would be 4. The 5 could be any outstate team at 15-13. The 6 would really either be the Respectors or the Bradshaws at 15-13. And then you'd win on the tiebreakers. Those are your 6 spots. And then boom, the Hams at 15-13 are out in that way. If you go 0-2, you'd be 14-14, and it doesn't look very good. You could get the 5 seed, but again, that means an 0-2 week from Water Family. It's not happening. A 6 seed at 14-14, you'd need the Millers to lose. That would put us at 13-15. Can't touch them on record. You'd need a loss from the Brain Damage, or just keeping your 72-point advantage on them in points scored. Then the biggest thing, the football team, it's a very specific thing. The football team would need to beat the Bradshaws, but both teams finish in the bottom 6. So that would make the football team 1-1 to stay 13-15, and the Bradshaws would be 0-2 to also finish 13-15. And that would put, the Millers below you on record. That put the football team, the Bradshaws, and the Brain Damage all below you. That makes the Hams 6 seed by default. Now, if Andrew gets this stat correction to move into 6th place this week and become 13-13, all of what I just said about going 0-2 and making the playoffs is a void. That means the football team would be 13-13. The Bradshaws would be 13-13. They're playing each other. One team's going to get at least one win, and that team is going to own the tiebreaker over the Hams. So it'd basically be a play-in game for the Bradshaws and the football team if the Hams were to go to 0-2 and that stat correction hits. Get it? Got it. Good. Okay. You go 0-2 and miss the playoffs without the stat correction if any one of the Millers football team or Bradshaws finishes 2-0, because the Hams are so far down in that tiebreaker. The top team at 14-14 would be getting in, and it will not be the Hams. Okay, those are all the teams that are in the playoffs right now. We're going to talk about now the scenario for whoever's 13-13, which is definitely the Bradshaws, could be the football team. Then the 12-14s, which definitely is the Millers, could be the football team. We'll see. On the outside looking in, and the Hams look vulnerable. Let's see how Graham can get in, and maybe Andrew. You got to think about the point score tiebreakers. I'll put that up here. Graham's got a much better shot than Andrew at 13-13 because Graham just had a 240-point week and is now at the top of this gaggle of teams from 5 through 9. So that'll be good for him. As long as he has a good week here, he'll have a good point scored tiebreaker for him. But there's a lot of teams that are close still. This is so muddy and hard to get through. But we're almost there. So if you're 13-13, definitely Graham, could be Andrew. If you go 2-0 next week, you'd be 15-13, and the highest you could get is the 4 seed. Imagine Boomtown going from from number 2 to number 11 back to number 4. What a crazy season that would be. That happens if Bradshaws go 2-0. The Respectors go 0-2, not likely, but not impossible. And Water Family wins outstate, so give them at least one win there. The Disciples would need to go 0-2, and the Bradshaws need to get the tiebreaker, and the Hamms just need to lose in some way. In that case, the way it shakes out, Pilsner's 1, Famileh is 2, Joe's are 3. Then the winner of Boomtown and the football team, as long as they get those tiebreakers, they'll be 15-13 in the 4. The Disciples will be the 5, and the Respectors are the 6. The Hamms are out in that scenario. It's Respectors or Hamms at the 6, I should say. Or no, what am I talking about? Because whatever. Forget I said anything. Oh my God, this is so difficult. The 5 seed. The 5 seed for the Bradshaws, if they go 2-0, they're the 5 seed if they're the top 15-13 team in points scored. So, like, the Disciples could be 16-12. Famileh could be 16-12. God, yeah, this is where it gets, like, so muddy and difficult. There's so many, permutations of how many teams could be 15-13, and, like, yeah. This is where my brain turned to mush. You're the 5 seed if you end up being the top 15-13 team, and we're just going to say that and go. You're going to be the 6 seed if you go 2-0, and the Hamms also go 2-0. If the Disciples can hold on to the point scored tiebreaker, which is definitely going to happen if you're the football team, and probably still going to happen if you're the Bradshaws. Water Family's got to win at least one game, and the Respectors would have to go 0-2. So then as long as you hold the tiebreaker over the Respectors in this scenario, it works out. Pilsner, Water Family, Joe's, Hamms at 16-12, Disciples at 15-13. Then likely the Bradshaws could be the football team at 15-13, and then the Respectors out, also at 15-13. You could go 2-0 and miss the playoffs if you are 13-13. So you need the Respectors and the Famileh to win at least once. Looks like it's going to happen. Hamms go 2-0. We'll see. And then the tiebreakers stay where they are. I guess unless, the Respectors outscore the Bradshaws, basically. The Respectors would have to take the tiebreaker from Graham. In that case, Pilsner, winner of outstate. The Joes, the Hamms at 16-12. The loser of the outstate battle also at 16-12. And then the 6th seed would be either the Disciples or Respectors. Yeah, at 15-13. And then the Bradshaws are out at the 7. From here, it gets a lot simpler, because then we're getting to 14-14, under 500 type of shit. Like, this is, we're through the worst of it. If the Bradshaws, we're going to say the Bradshaws and the football team can come back in if it happens to them. If the Bradshaws go 1-1, they'll be 14-14. The best they can do at 14-14 is the 6th seed. They get the 6th seed if the Hamms go 0-2 and the Millers catch a loss. They miss the playoffs if the Hamms can win just one game or the Millers go 2-0. Because the Millers are going to win that tiebreaker. If you go 0-2, you're under 500, you're not making it. That's it. Okay. Time to talk about how the Millers can get in. I'm delusional. At 12-14, right now we have the Millers and the football team and the brain damage. The football team, of course, could get that stat correction. At 2-0, let's just think about the Millers because they have the tiebreaker. All the football team and the brain damage. The brain damage has a very specific scenario that will get them in specifically that I'll talk about after this. But it's easier to think about how the Millers could get in because it really feels like it's over, but there's a way. There's a way, and it's pretty simple. But it starts with going 2-0. So the Millers are playing the average Joes, and the Millers would have to go 2-0 to get to 14-14. We'd pick up the 6th seed if the Hamms go 0-2 against Pilsner. Not impossible. The Bradshaws catch a loss in some way, so Andrew could just win head-to-head. then yeah, that's it. Because then the Hams would be 14-14. The Bradshaws would catch a loss. They'd be 14-14, and the football team would be also 14-14 or worse than that. If this stat correction comes in and the football team go to 500, then the Millers would need that one thing I talked about with Kevin, where like the team that wins Bradshaw's football team would have to be in the bottom 6. So everyone finishes at 500 or worse. Then Kevin also goes 0-2 to finish at 500. Then I go 2-0 to also finish at 500. And then it's a whole 14-14 log jam, of which the Millers would win. That's pretty complicated. We'd miss the playoffs if the Hams catch a single win or the Bradshaws go 2-0. That would make them 15-13. I can't get to that spot. So pretty cut and dry for the Millers. Go 2-0, have the Hams shit the bed, and then get a football team victory right now. Or just someone, the winner of that game, finish in the bottom 6. That's how the Millers get in. The scenario for the brain damage is pretty tough. The Hams would have to go 0-2, and the brain damage makes up their 72 points scored difference. They're down by 72. The football team would have to beat the Bradshaws with a lucky win, which would make both the football team and the Bradshaws 13-15. Of course, this is irrelevant if the football team's stat correction happens. And then the Millers would just have to lose. In that scenario, you get Pilsner 1, let's say Respectors 2, Joe's 3, Disciples 4, Famileh 5, Brain Damage 6, Ham 7, lose the tiebreaker, Millers 8 at 13-15, Bradshaws are 13-15, football team's 13-15. That's the only way Dylan gets eliminated from the playoffs in any other scenario. The football team needs that same thing to happen, except they don't have to make up a tiebreaker against the Hams. They already have it. So just win and be 14-14, and then have the Hams go 0-2, and the Millers catch a loss. That's how the football team gets in. So it's pretty simple for these 12 and 14 teams. Just go 2-0, and then you're going to need a little bit of help. But like the help is actually stuff that seems likelier than some of the other things. So we're talking about seeding and all that. That's it. I really hope that made sense. I don't know if it did. I will send the document I just read off of into the chat, and I might put it in an email as well, just to make sure everyone knows what's going on. But God, dude, have fun. We'll watch the stat corrections Thursday night. Week 14 begins, and then we'll know our playoff setup by hopefully Monday. I would really like to not have another stat correction bonanza type of game. Okay. Set your lineups, have fun. We'll see you at New Year's Eve playoff preview video next week.
Wake your punk ass up. It ain't nothing but a Compton thing. Chill. Real simple and plain. Let me teach you some lessons about the street.